My name is Hannah, and this is my year of less stuff. Hey y'all, so I just opened a PR package from Alter Ego. They just launched a new palette, the ARTEMIS palette, and I decided to sit down and film just a straight up swatch video. I'm just going to be swatching it. I haven't opened it yet. I opened the box, I put the stuff that was in the box right here, and I'm going to open it with you and I'm just going to swatch. So I'm not going to be reviewing the palette in this video. This is really just like good close-up swatch footage for people who want to know how the palette looks and how it swatches. And just for fun, also. This kind of video is fun to film, and it's also fun to watch. So that's it. I'm gonna open this other stuff because they sent it, and I didn't know that this other stuff was gonna be in the package, so I don't even really know what it all is. We're gonna find out together, but I'll put a timestamp down below. If you came here just to see the swatches of the palette, you can click the timestamp link and it will take you right to when I start opening and swatching the palette. Let's go ahead and get into the meat of the video. It looks like this is brushes. Yeah, this is, I guess I sort of knew that Alter Ego had come out with brushes, but I didn't really know anything about them. But this feels nice. It's like structurally, it's nice and it's a nice shape. I really like this shape of brush though. I'm kind of happy to see this. This is the kind of little brush that I like to use for concealer that's in a pot, like the NARS Soft Matte Creamy Concealer that I use to conceal blemishes. This is another brush shape that I really like. It's like small and a little bit domed, almost like a pencil brush, but not too pointy and not too dense. This is the number 7 brush. I like small brushes because I like having control over where different shadows are placed on my eyes. So I tend to gravitate towards little brushes like this. This is something that I've been curious about. I'm actually glad that they sent this along because I'm looking forward to trying it. It's the eyeshadow base. Nice packaging. There's the swatch right there. It looks like it's not sheer. It looks like it has a little bit of pigment to it, which isn't usually the kind of thing I use for eye primer, so it'll be interesting to see how it wears. I don't really wear lashes these days. I might pick one pair of these and just play around with it, try it out so that I can let you guys know how they apply and how they wear, but most of these I'll probably give away or donate. Okay, let's go ahead and open the palette. Oh good, nothing broke. I'm always worried when I open something on camera for the first time. This is a lot of eyeshadows, you guys. A 28 pan palette. I think that this might be the biggest eyeshadow palette I have just in terms of how many shadows are in it. It's a lot. For size comparison, here's the Alter Ego Daydream palette. So ARTEMIS is a little bit bigger. Here's the Natasha Denona Gold palette. They're pretty much exactly the same size. The edges are shaped a little bit differently, so it's not a perfect match, but they are pretty much the same size. And then here's the Natasha Denona Sunrise palette, which is, again, smaller. Let's go ahead and swatch. I'm eager to find out how these shadows perform. I'm actually gonna go in columns instead of rows because that way I can do 4 fingers, 1 in each pan, and then wipe off my hand and then return and do 4 more. So we'll start with this column. Feels creamy. It feels like it has that interesting mix of feeling creamy and also having like flakes, like really rich pigmented flakes that I recognize from Natasha Denona shadows. But I tend to be kind of overzealous with swatches and then get these little flakes of matte pigment falling off. That happens to me with a lot of different kinds of eyeshadows. This one feels a little bit like it's trying to be a cream to powder. I didn't love the Alter Ego cream to powder formula that they had in the dupe for the Biba palette. And this feels like it's kind of that. It's a little bit slick. It's not as rich. This one feels really lovely and rich though, and also has that creaminess. And then down here, ugh, you gotta love a Prussian blue. That's beautiful. So we have Hunt, Silent, Thrill, and Ambush. So Ambush swatched way brighter and lighter than I expected it to. It really looks like a rich, deep, dark blue in the pan, but I can tell just from swatching that it's going to be really hard to get it to look that way on the eyes. It's actually a bright blue. I like Thrill though, this second from the bottom shadow right here. It's almost as if that slick cream to powder formula is actually working in its favor because there's something about the color and the finish. But with Silent, it doesn't feel like it's quite working as well. It just feels a little bit almost like a putty-like hard pan. The matte formula is really nice though, the Alter Ego matte formula. It's impressive, and Hunt is no exception. All right, this next column is really exciting. It looks right up my alley. So Provoke, this definitely feels textured, a little bit flaky, and it's really shiny. Scent, even better as far as I'm concerned. It's got even brighter, ooh, it's a bit of a duochrome. Yeah, this reminds me of Lime Chrome from the Gold palette. And then Spear also looks like it's got, look at that. Oof, that's like a really pretty chartreuse metallic. I love these three. And then Prowl, again, it's not that dry, flaky, creamy matte. It's like that cream to powder imitation matte. A lot of these shadows have that quality. Provoke, Scent, Spear, that's my favorite one so far. And then Prowl. Okay, so Prowl, it's not swatching as badly as I thought it would actually from the way that it felt. It really has a putty-like quality, and it makes it feel like I can't get the pigment that I want when I'm dipping into it. But in fact, when I went to swatch it, it turned out that there was plenty of pigment on my finger. This is one that I'm immediately eager to put all over my lids. I kind of want to see how it performs, how it sticks, and how it wears. Scent is very exciting. It's like Lime Chrome, but it's like it's got a warm toned base underneath it. And Provoke as well. They both just are very, very sparkly. Yeah, this is my jam. All right, let's move on to this next row. So Entice up here on top, it feels just like Hunt. It has that soft, creamy, sort of silky matte feeling, but it's definitely not a cream texture, right? It's a matte. Camouflage is feeling a little redundant to me after Provoke, Scent, and Spear. It's a rich kind of coppery bronze. This is a very unique color. I love this. I love this sage, dirty sage, greeny brown, really awesome. This one also is a metallic. It doesn't feel like that creamy cream to powder, but Stealth down here is that cream to powder. And yeah, I don't know if you can see, but when I try to pick up one of these cream to powder, sorry, I'm getting kind of close to the mic because I stood up. I hope it's not too creepy and ASMR-y. Can you see that? How it's sort of pushing the pan? I mean, I'm pressing pretty hard and I'm pushing and it's like making dents in it. So it's really quite putty-like. And then what comes off onto my finger feels like it's sort of stainy. It's almost like I'm getting some pigment that's just staining my finger in a creamy kind of way. So here's Entice. That's not swatching very well actually, but it's definitely a lighter color than Hunt. So I guess comparatively, it does kind of look like it compares to the swatch the way that the pan compares to the pan. That one, Alter Ego always kills it with these creamy bronzes. You just cannot go wrong. Beautiful. This is going to be a really interesting shadow to play with. It's almost just like a ever so slightly more metallic version of Prowl. And then, yeah, I just don't like this. I don't like that it looks like really rich and deep and forest green in the pan, and like you could just fall into it. And then you swatch it and it's basically like a bright grassy green, and it has this sense of like a staining dye. It feels almost like Play-Doh with too much dye in it. All right, let's do this middle row. So obscure here on top, kind of a ho-hum color, but I know it's very useful to some people. Swatching pretty well, just like a nice creamy metallic. Victory. It'll be interesting to see how this looks because I feel like it looks in the pan the way that Ambush looks on my arm. It's just that it's a metallic. In the pan, they look like they're very, very different colors, but I have a feeling they're going to swatch kind of similarly. And similarly, Pursuit and Stealth, I don't know, they look like they have something in common. Actually, that's not really a comparable situation. And Pounce down here, an even more coppery metallic than Camouflage. It's like our first real orangey color. Sorry, I'm going to try to keep it in frame while I'm swatching. So here we have Obscure, pretty nice. I can imagine myself never using that shadow. Victory, beautiful. That's like a standout shade, I feel like, in the palette, just in terms of the color scheme, and the performance is good. If you buy this palette for this shade, I don't think you'll be disappointed. Oh yeah, look at that. So these rich blue and green metallics are really holding their own in this formula, and that one as well. Those last three are, you know, they've got the creaminess that makes them feel super malleable and blendable and rich and thick, but they're not so silicone-y that it feels like they're going to crease on the eyes. So I really like what they did there. Gosh, the palette looks so redundant, this color story. I mean, I understand the value of having like a metallic version of this type of green and then a more putty matte version. But I think that at a glance, it kind of looks like I swatched the same shadows 3 times over. Okay, let's keep going, and I'm gonna move on to my other arm so that I can have all the swatches together at the end. Ravage, this is another sort of straight up creamy metallic. Feels nice. Stalk, same thing. I really like this color. I like, well, this is flaking a little bit. I don't know how well you can see it, but it isn't holding together the same way some of the other ones do. I really like this kind of like bloody rose gold. This is a beautiful color, like a burnt sienna color, but got some green mixed in. It is that same cream to powder formula that I'm just not totally convinced about how the dupe version of it performs. And this one too, Lure, but it feels even more creamy. Like, look at that. Ravage, wow, that swatched really nice. Stalk also swatched beautifully. So the flakes that were coming up in the pan just turned to cream in the swatch. I actually have no worries about how that's going to perform. Captivate, that's nice actually. It swatched way better on my arm than I felt like it was going to when I picked it up on my finger. And Lure got some big chunks of cream. That's pretty much, it feels like a cream eyeshadow. Like that isn't even a cream to powder. It's just like a cream. So I'm curious to know how it will dry. Again, I feel like I'm swatching a bunch of colors that I already swatched. I know they're not exactly the same, it's just how I feel. Already, I haven't even finished swatching this palette, and already I'm dying to make an edit of it, like to pop some of the shades out and just make a smaller and more ideal and less overwhelming version. Maybe I'll do that as a little bit of a bonus content right at the end of this video. Catch, again, like another slightly coppery metallic gold. Like we've already had 1, 2, 3, sort of almost between like 3 and 5 or 6 of them, depending on how broad your definition is. Quiver, another cream to powder putty sort of brown with warm undertones. Pluck, this is very beautiful. This is also kind of a rose gold, but it's like a brown, a dirty browny rose gold. Love that. And Conquer, this is definitely the most red of everything that we've seen so far. Wow, what a good swatch. That one too. Yeah, these are swatching great. This is really looking yummy to me. All right, one more row. I'm deeply curious about how this dark blue is gonna swatch because so far we haven't gotten any like dark colors. These are all like light and bright and sort of mid-toned. There's nothing to really ground the palette to give it like that depth and that grunge. I would love it if there were a black in here, but you know, I feel like short of that, this is my last hope. Help me, Bo B1 Kenobi. You're my only hope. All right, this is Trap, kind of lackluster. Snare, this is a true matte. This isn't a cream. This is one of those powder mattes, and that looks like it's gonna perform really well. Bow, this is one of those cream to powders, and it looks the same pretty much as Ambush, the first one we swatched. This is another very beautiful grubby green. I love these khaki greens. We have Trap, nice. Snare, nice. Bow, it looks exactly the same as Ambush. I mean, look at that. I'm gonna build it up a little bit and we'll see what we can get, but yeah, it's really not that deep, rich color that it appears to be. But Quest, the last one, is a really deep, rich, beautiful color. Pretty similar though to some of the ones that we've already seen. All right, I'm going to just wipe my hands off and zoom out a little bit so you can see all of the swatches at once, and we will reassess. Okay, there you go. I think everything's in frame. And here's what I will say. Again, I have not used this palette on my eyes, and I don't own the Natasha Denona palette that this is duping. So I don't really know how accurate of a dupe this is. I'm kind of just basing it on what I'm seeing here on my arms. Like, I'm really just swatching this palette and playing with it. That said, though, I am familiar with Natasha Denona's formula, and in my experience, the Natasha Denona shades tend to look lighter in the pan than they actually are when they're swatched and then they are on the eyes. In other words, I often take a color from a Natasha Denona palette and then I end up with a deeper color than I kind of thought that I was getting. I feel like in this case, the opposite is true, especially with these rich, deep blues. In fact, I don't have the Natasha Denona Metropolis palette, but I do have Python, which is in the gold palette. I'm gonna grab it and do a little bit of a comparison. So here's Python from the gold palette. It is a cream to powder shade. Really similar, I think, to Ambush. I mean, look at that. They look the same in the pan, right? But you can see that Python is swatching on my finger exactly the way that it looks in the pan. It's swatching nice and deep, whereas Ambush, it swatches this sort of like brightened version of itself. There's Python, and there's Ambush. Now again, this is from the gold palette, it's not from the Metropolis palette, and it could be that the blues in the Metropolis palette, that this is how they swatch out. It could be that they are indeed this bright and that this is very similar in terms of swatches. But as someone who doesn't have that palette and who isn't planning to buy it, I will say that this palette strikes me as one that doesn't have really properly deepening shades in it for my tastes. I really like to have a shade that I can put in the outer corner that will make the look grungy, really make it smoked out, and also allow me to sculpt my eyes pretty dramatically because I have hooded eyes. So I'm often smoking out the outer corner with a dark brown or a black. And this palette doesn't have a dark brown, and it doesn't have a black, and it doesn't even have a blue that's dark enough to serve. I really do like the Alter Ego formula. I feel like they're working with some pretty impressive formulas here. My favorite palette from them is the Daydream palette, and I reach into this palette all the time. I find it incredibly useful, and it's not just the colors, it's just that the mattes are so blendable and the shimmers are really creamy, and I often will reach into this when I'm just kind of like not quite sure, or I need something to put all over the lid or something to blend out, and it always goes seamlessly. I love it for the color scheme, but I love it for the formula just as much because it's easy to work with. It never messes anything up for me. It always goes beautifully. And this, I feel like, is probably reliable in the same way. I was actually pleasantly surprised by how these kind of Play-Doh feeling shadows swatched out, especially the more neutral ones. The blue ones, maybe not so much. They all ended up a little bit brighter, and even like this green one, not so much. It ended up a little bit brighter. And I feel like these really deep, rich, vibrant blues and greens that I think of when I think of the Metropolis palette, you're not quite getting that with these kind of like brighter hues. But there are so many dupe palettes or palettes that are copying trends that just have really crappy formulas. And that's not the case here. This is a good formula. So if this is a color scheme that you're interested in playing with, that you're just curious about and you want to dabble in, but you aren't passionate enough about it to buy the Natasha Denona one, or you don't have the Metropolis palette because it's too expensive and you just don't want to be buying palettes at that price point right now, the formula is good enough on this palette that it makes it a really good option for playing around with this color scheme. Now, that said, I want to play around with this color scheme in a way that's particular to me, which is that I would like to weed out the colors that feel redundant to me and reduce it down to the ones that actually feel really special and super useful. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. If you're not interested in that and you just wanted to see the close-up swatches and see whether the shadows actually had any grit, then thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed seeing these swatches, and I feel like they do have a grit. I feel like the formulas are actually pretty great. Some of the colors swatched lighter than I expected them to, but most of them look great. So that's kind of like the conclusion that I have for now. I'm gonna go wash off my arms. I'll be right back and I'll pop out some of these shadows and play around with reorganizing them. Okay, so I definitely want to get these kind of like grungy greens out of here. I loved this one. I loved this one. That whole row was the first thing I pulled. Now, I do want to retain some of that kind of blue-green, rich blue-green presence, but I didn't really love the way that these like cream to powder ones swatched, but the metallic ones swatched really well. So let's take out that one. I really liked this cream to powder brown. This one was like so creamy and delicious. And this one too, Captivate. And remember these, like I feel like you have to keep some of that orange presence to retain the spirit of the palette. Oh, and this one, remember? Oh, both of these. The sort of brownish rose gold and the more bloody rose gold. Yeah. This is looking like a pretty good edit. I feel like we do need one of the more true blues, like one of the actual, it wouldn't really like retain the spirit of the palette again without that, but I don't feel like we need all three of them, and they swatched so similarly. This is a little magnetic palette from Nabla that one of you kindly sent me as a gift back when I was still receiving subscriber gifts in the mail. So there's my little edit. And one of the things that's interesting about doing this is that you can see how tiny the pans are. Essentially, you can see how little eyeshadow there is, right? It's a really tiny pan, and it's also really shallow. It's really small. Here is Python again for comparison. The pan's much bigger, and it's also much deeper. It's much thicker. And so you can see why Alter Ego is able to sell these palettes at such a low price, because it's way less eyeshadow than you're getting when you buy other palettes. For me, that's great because I have a lot of eyeshadow. I don't need huge pans. I don't need, a ton of each color, especially when there's a palette that has so many shadows in it to begin with. I just feel like I'm not going to use Python up, and I'm not going to use any of these up either. So I'm not a person who's looking for like bang for my buck in that way when I buy eyeshadow, but it's just good to note because I know that some people are looking for that. So I put them in here. I didn't just edit the palette down. I also rearranged the way in which they like relate to each other. So in the original palette, the three blues that are pretty similar are like scattered all over the place. All of the colors that are similar to each other, they're not next to each other. When you put them next to each other, it gives a different understanding, I feel like, of what kind of color story we're dealing with here with this palette. It's basically a rainbow palette. It's like a mixed up rainbow. I mean, mine isn't a mixed up rainbow. Mine is a genuine rainbow. But I feel like this really shows that the Metropolis and Artemis palettes are rainbow palettes. So that is it, y'all. I'm actually gonna leave this like this. I feel like I'm a little bit more excited. No, you know what? I'm not. I'm gonna put them back. I was about to say that I was gonna leave this like this because I was excited. I felt more excited to use this little palette than I did to use the whole thing. But I'm kind of curious what will become of me if I use the original palette in its initial form for a couple of days. This is, again, the first time I've opened it, so I haven't had the chance. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and put everything back real quick. If you have any questions for me that I didn't answer in this video, go ahead and leave them in the comment section down below and I will try to help. I'm also curious to know, those of you who do own the Metropolis palette, what you think looking at this footage, how much of an exact dupe you think it is, and you know, whatever else you think. The thing I'm actually the most curious to know is what people think of this color story. Does it seem like a grungy rainbow to you? Does it seem like a rainbow palette? What do you think of the fact that there are three blues that are all similar to each other, but they're spread out? There are greens that are similar to each other, but they're spread out. Just like, what do you think of this palette in general? I would love to hear what you have to say. That is it. I'm gonna go ahead and get to editing this so I can get it up on YouTube as soon as possible because I know that the palette just launched today. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed it. And don't forget to take extra good care of yourself so that you can be the most effective version of yourself as you do your work in the world.